How's it going? YouTube comments in today with another video. And today, guys, what to bring to you is another episode of the GGYGO podcast. And today, I'm joined by some friends. If you want to introduce yourselves.
What is up, all of my beautiful dudes and dudettes? We got Darthnash6 here right now. I got my mate, and I'm excited to talk with you guys.
And what's up? It's your boy Rini here, Werrasweet.
I'm very excited to do this episode today. It's just going to be one of those things where we're going to talk a lot about the format, and it's going to be really exciting when we talk a lot about tier. I know that a lot of people aren't really on the hype train with tier, but hopefully we can have some nice discussion around the deck and talk about why it's so good right now and how we can see the format change and what we can really see to balance the format as well. If you're new here, definitely check out my sponsors over an Imperium Duelist, a Dragon Shield, and Gem. And without further ado, hop right on into our first topic. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be, what's a deck that either of you want support for right now?
For me personally, we all know that I'm kind of, I freaking love dual terminal decks. That's my thing. I just love them so much. And I really want X-Saber to get some legacy support. We've got a lot of Earth support, Beast support, all that kind of stuff, but I just want X-Saber. Like, free my man Invoker, you know?
Yeah, Invoker is really good. That was a card that got banned back in Zoo format, and definitely really crazy for what it did. Being able to just go ahead and get so much free advantage out of the deck. Honestly, looking at even like the Invoker being gone right now, I think that it'd be really interesting to see if we got like Terror Top back to 3, but who knows?
Yeah.
Personally, I'd want to see more support for Nature. I know they just got recently like more support, but I feel like it's not enough. Like, I want it to be tier 1.
It's really interesting too that you mentioned that, because so I haven't really played against any Naturia whatsoever, and so when I was at the regional this weekend, my buddy on the lunch break was like, "Hey, I'm playing Naturia. Do you want to play against it so you know what to do if you're playing against it later on in the tourney?" And I got to learn what Mole Cricket did, and that card was nuts.
They're both insane. Like, Naturia 100% suffers the thing of a not great archetype that has unbelievably busted cards within it. And Camilla and Mole Cricket right there. They are perfect examples of unbelievably powerful cards locked within okay archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Naturia actually did pretty well with the Naturia runic list over the weekend too at the YCS, so that was definitely interesting to see.
Yeah, I saw that. Definitely want to try that out. Maybe top the locals with it.
It's definitely interesting to see the runic cards doing well again with the Ishizu cards being in the grave.
Yeah.
Yeah, the runic package is what caught me off guard with that. I really want to mess around with that on paper to see if I'm smart enough to do as well with it as the guy who got, was it top 32 or top 64?
I think it was top 64.
Still good for him, you know?
Yeah, it's still a top regardless. Like, that's still incredible.
Yeah, at a 2,000 plus person event, astonishing.
Right. Like, how did that whole like, what was his end board? Like, what's the game plan with like Nature and Runic?
Yeah, I really don't know. I just know that like with the runic cards not having a battle phase, you really just want to be able to set up a board that's like so oppressive that your opponent really can't do anything, so the battle phase doesn't matter. And that's where like Sprite did it so well with like double cross, smashers, and all these different cards that you can utilize. Whereas with the Naturia deck, you have like the Sunflower, then Bamboo Shoot. Like, you have a couple cards that are really strong, but I just don't know what the end board would have been to really mattered against like Ishizu tier in particular, because I'm sure that matchup was really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, from my understanding, he would usually end on Naturia Beast and Sunflower with the runic cards to back it up, so that you're just constantly negating spells and monster effects.
Interesting.
I think that's cool too, because so the whole thing with Runic, besides the fact that the Mudora and the Keldo can shuffle back like the names that you want to go ahead and shuffle back with like the fountain. The other concern was that people have Heartbeat or they have Cosmic for like your fountain. So being able to have a beast set up to be able to protect your fountain is also pretty cool. So for me, if I were to pick a deck right now that I really wanted support for, just to see like what more the deck could probably do. And this is actually kind of funny, because if anyone's watched my channel for a really long time, you would know that the deck that I've said I'd never play again was Mermail. I've owned it 3 times, and every single time I was like, I'm never going to pick the deck up again, and I pick it up again. The deck has like unreal engine in it. Like Moulin Glacia, the ability to just dump and to search so many times with Dragoon. Like there's so many different things that you can do within that deck, but it still just is not competitive. So in my eyes, I really want to see what Mermail can do. I know that a lot of people are trying out Kashtira with the Mermail engine just because of the fact that they're all level 7, so you can get a little further in combo, a little bit of synergy there. But I think that it's really interesting to see what would happen if we got like a new level 7 water.
Mm-hmm.
If like one of the Kashtiras was water, that would be insane.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool synergy if it was also just like randomly a Sea Serpent, you know? So we'll see. I definitely want to see what kind of support that could get.
I'd say let's free title from the ban list, but that would make Tears a little too good.
Title from the ban list would be pretty good right now. You know, I've always said this too, back, like, just thinking about the Brave engine, because we were looking at which D-rulers could come off the list, and I'm pretty sure the only other one that actually just could would be Blaster. Being able to go, like, Title and Enchantress to the graveyard, like, that seems kind of crazy.
It'd be so oppressive. Just, like, even just factoring in the adventure package with something as simple as getting Big Eye on board it'd be, like, it just too much to... I don't know, it'd be so annoying. I would hate having to face that every locals, every regionals, just like, oh, cool. So a Griffin Rider and change of heart on legs. Awesome. Love this.
I mean, it's either that or Draco Sack with the token generator.
Oh my gosh, because then you can equip Draco back to the tokens.
Yeah. That'd be cool. There's probably like a lot of cool things you could do. I would definitely just be going and linking off like as soon as possible, making like a huge board. So, especially like under Moulin Glacia, like just being able to rip 2 as well. I know that with tier you got to be careful because like if you rip 2 and you hit like a name, that's kind of unfortunate. But it still would be really interesting to see like what the deck could accomplish right now. Just kind of moving on into our next topic as well. Do either of you feel like tier needs an E-ban?
I think so. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't mind banning some of the cards, even though like I do own the deck. It would be a neg for me in my wallet, but I wouldn't mind the ban.
Yes, I think Tier's at a point where it needs to get an emergency ban, just because of how quickly it's dominated the format. But the thing is that Zodiac never got an emergency ban, and it dominated the format much quicker and more oppressively.
So with Zoo, that's actually a good question to bring up now. I don't know if as many people hated Zoo format as they hate tier format. So what do you think was like the major difference in that?
I think it's because Zoo is not nearly as thought intensive as the tier mirror matches. Like the Zoo mirror match is definitely, it's very skill intensive, but it is nowhere near what the Ishizu tier mirror matches. And I feel like some people are just getting burnt out from having to do several matches in a row of this mirror match, and it's just draining.
I could definitely understand that. For me personally, and not just like because I also play the deck, you know, like there's a lot of times when you have to just consider the format as a whole. I just think that this format has been a lot of fun, especially with the skill intensive. And I think that there are different areas of the game that you can say that we kind of need attention to at certain points in a year, right? So like we went from having 15 different decks that were good, then we might have gotten a couple more that were even better at the time. So like you had so many different decks to prepare for that you could not prepare for all of them, and a lot of times you end up losing to certain matchups because you couldn't mitigate them all in your siding. And then we're now into a format where there's definitely one dominant deck. There's a couple other choices that you can go after, but Tier is definitely in the driver's seat right now as being like the best deck in the format. So I do feel like it is a bit healthy to have formats where there's a lot of variety, and then formats where it's just skill intensive, play like the best deck in the room. And I think that's what's really cool about the game too, just because there are different ways that you can play. And then going into even like next format, me personally, I think that that's going to warrant an E-ban before this format does, because we get Photon Hypernova with the new Cashier cards, and you can't even activate a spell or trap card in your turn because they lock down all of your spell and trap zones. And
Yeah, I'm not
that's going to
excited
be
about that.
crazy. So like if you think evenly matched is going to deal with that board, it's crazy. So that's one thing that I think will warrant an E-ban. I think this format's fine, but like I definitely understand that there's a lot of different decks out there that can't really function without a graveyard, and then you have to play like a lot of cards to be able to mitigate that. I know even right now I'm citing in 12 cards just to beat Flanders. So like there are a lot of different things that you got to consider in the format. I thought it was really funny too. I was having a conversation with my friend yesterday. Shout out to Austin Smothers for this one too, because I thought this was like a really interesting conversation. We were talking about how the more that we played Tearlament, the more the D shifter just never mattered, and it's kind of like wild to say that, but like if you're playing against like Flanders and you have a way to special and a way to normal, you just make Bagooska and pass and you just wait it out. Or like if you're playing against like D shifter being activated, then you can always like use Magnemut and like banish it and then get a search for Magnemut as well. And like there's so many different things that you can just like do to survive through a D shifter. And then like if your opponent doesn't have like some crazy way to lock you out of the game, you're probably still just winning the game.
Yeah, I remember seeing on MBT's stream that the insane thing about Tier is that the deck has gotten to the point now where a good player knows how to easily play around Dimension Shifter even if they get hit. It's like Dimension Shifter only stops the not experienced Shizu tier players, whereas everybody else is like, okay.
Yeah, in my main deck, I main Orange Light and I side Gamma. So there's a lot of answers to Deep Shifter right now in my deck currently. Any other thoughts on the E-ban as of now?
Yeah, pretty much just like if they hit Tearlaments, I wouldn't mind it. I've actually never played in the Zodiac format, so I don't know how bad that was.
It was like more annoying Evil Swarm because you had the perception that you could still do something, but you couldn't because nothing could stick to the field no matter what. It was like one of the first times that Winter Cherries was really, really, really big as a side deck or even as a main deck option, just because Dryden was such a huge issue. It was like, oh, I summon? They're like, Dryden pop? I'm like, son of a nutcracker.
Barrage?
Yeah, it's, oh my gosh. Um, I can see, I guess one of the main reasons that I could see an E-ban possibly happening is just how long matches go. Um, and like that itself is pretty counterintuitive to me wanting to keep main events like within a reasonable time frame. And so from that point of view, I can see why it would warrant an E-ban. But the gameplay itself, from the player's point of view, like I said earlier, it's just mentally exhausting.
Like, you don't think they'd rather change the time rules then instead of like an event?
I think that the only way that you can really fix things right now is by making it 0-1 instead of the end of the phase.
I cannot agree more with that. That's yeah, like just that. Not the whole like the original time rules, but yeah, exactly. Just 0, 1, and then at the end of that, be like, there you are. That's it. That's all you get.
Mhm.
So,
And
talking more so about the emergency ban list, talking more so about Tier being the best deck currently, what do we feel would balance the format?
this is a pretty tough question because I feel like this, like with the introduction of Sprite Tier Ishizu, like everything post Power of the Elements, the metagame has completely shifted. Um, you could argue that a lot of people felt that way when Dogmatica and Access Code first came out, but you could still play older cards. But this is definitely the new shift. It's like the biggest shift the game has had since Duelist Alliance, since that whole era. And balancing the format, I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh would be taking a few steps backwards, and I don't know how best to answer that. Um, Looking ahead, I'm trying to figure out what we got to do to balance it, but then you have to factor in power creep and like it's almost like Power of the Elements has forced a kind of set rotation um for archetypes.
All right. Yeah, it's a pretty loaded question. I feel like a lot of the players that play Yu-Gi-Oh are also like just casuals. So if Konami wants to like lessen the barrier of entry for these casual players, I think they need to make more cards that can be utilized in like every archetype, so that I feel like every player can play the game how they want to, I guess.
And I think that's where we see triple tax. That's a new one coming out of Photon Hypernova. That just basically says if your opponent activates a card, then just like get a free spell card. And
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of those that I feel like are going to get printed, where it's just basically like activate this card, you win the game. And with balancing the format, I feel like from like a competitive standpoint, I think where the game is at right now, it's very fun as far as like the amount of interaction. If you really wanted to do anything with the format to make it where more people felt like you could play the game and you don't have to play one specific deck, I'm always a huge fan of triangle formats. And I feel like balancing it back down to a triangle format, maybe releasing a new archetype that just says, hey, this deck counters the graveyard inherently. Or talking more so about like what's another like a third deck that they could give either support to, bring something off the ban list for, and just again just kind of melting the format back down into a triangle versus just like one deck being the best deck.
Yes. King Scarlet actually had a really good video about that sometime last week, where he talked about why, formats with 3 to 5 decks that everybody is playing are the best for that exact reason, because you are given almost the illusion of choice, but you're content enough to play with any of those decks and you're going to see success. And then from the competitive standpoint, you're not going to be overwhelmed with trying to set up your main deck and side deck to combat the 15 viable decks of the format. So it's like this beautiful balance with the casual players who want to play what they want to play, with the competitive players who want to play what wins. And it's this, healthy little in between for everybody. So I think you're absolutely correct. If they're able to get a new deck that turns this into a three-way stalemate, then the format would feel so much better.
Yeah, with the format the way it is right now, I feel like there's definitely a lot of disdain toward tier, and again, it's just because that deck is just so obnoxious with how it interacts with the format, especially like even talking about cards like Mystic Mine, right? I still feel like that card needs to go just because of the second that tier is not the best deck, then that card's gonna be an issue again. The only reason it's not an issue right now is because Chain Keldo pop field spell. But like besides that, like there's a lot of cards in the game right now that just really do need to go as far as like if we are talking about the balancing act that is Yu-Gi-Oh. And I feel like that's another reason why, especially for me, the format's so fun right now, is because all of, like the really crazy floodgates or like Mystic Mine, like all these cards that are just genuinely a problem, especially if you look like even a format ago where everyone was just like getting super angry at Mystic Mine, like you haven't heard about Mystic Mine because tier just deals with it. And I think that's another thing that I really like about having such a crazy combo deck that can also deal with its outs. And so for me, I feel like that's what's been really fun about the deck. But like if you were to balance it back down to just that triangle, you really also have to look at other cards in the format, because like let's say right now you go ahead and just hit tier, and like tier is just not necessarily dead, but like a lot of the power is gone, right? Runic Sprite becomes the best deck again. And then if you're looking at Runic Sprite being the best deck again, they're still playing a lot of the Bystials, which also is talking more so about like the Dragon Link Bystial deck that's running around right now. That deck is going to be insane still. So you start to looking at cards like Striker Dragon. You have to look at cards in the Sprite engine. Maybe you deal with Angler to make sure that the deck isn't going to go way too crazy. So like there's so many different cards you got to think about in a whole whenever you're looking at how to rebalance the format.
Yeah, it's really intensive.
So kind of leaning off of that too, talking about like the longevity of a deck in a format, kind of like how BA was around for forever. Like the deck still is just where it was before, like they got most of their cards back, if not all, from the ban list as well, which is really cool. And then Dante just dodged every single ban list, which was always crazy. Every single ban list, you're like, is Dante hit this time? And it wasn't. You're like, all right. So that was always really interesting. I know that Tearlament got hit in the OCG. They limited Havnus, they limited Perlarino, but then they printed a new Perlarino and a new Havnus. So for me, I really think that Tearlament is about to be the new BA as far as like long term. What do we think about Tearlament and its future in the game?
Yeah, for sure. I've never actually played like in Burning Abyss either, but hearing about like how Zodiac kind of dodged all that too, I don't think that Konami will hit tournaments anytime soon.
Since, like I said earlier, we are at the start of a new era of Yu-Gi-Oh! At Tearlaments is, unless it gets absolutely decimated by the Forbidden and Limited list, it will be the new deck that will not die. Because of the love that people have for it right now, especially the very competitive-minded players, it's going to be a deck that people will be labbing and theorying with for months, if not for the next 2 years, to constantly have this be a viable deck just because of how many interactions that it offers. Like we've mentioned before, like floodgates aren't a huge problem in the meta right now because the way that Tier can dodge most of the floodgates. Like Tier isn't a very oppressive deck, it's a very interactive deck that just always has an interaction, and I think that's why people like it, and that's why people are going to want to stick with it, because playing Tier, you feel like you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Instead of just setting up a board and passing turn. And that's really enticing. Even from a casual viewpoint, Tier's just one of those decks where you are constantly playing the game with your opponent and just having that back and forth. And that's enjoyable. That's fun. And that's what makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Enjoyable.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really do like about the deck too. If I orange light my opponent and I send a Kelbeck, and then I can be like, Kelbeck effect, we both mill 5, you know? And especially if you're playing as not Tier, and then you're only like realistically hitting in your graveyard as far as like effects go. I think that that's really cool because there's a lot of moments in this game where you've played against a deck like, for say, Goki, where either you got Rongo dropped on you or you got your whole hand ripped, and you just really couldn't do anything about it. But like, if you can stop your opponent mid-turn and then be like, all right, mill 5, hit 2 names, and then do like 2 or 3 fusions on your turn, like that's kind of crazy as far as like the way the game has been lately. And for me, I think that this is definitely going to be a deck that we see for a really long time. And we'll talk about power creep in a little while as well. But like, just talking about how can you power creep fusions on your opponent's turn, you know? Like, there's so many different things about this that is like so crazy, because it's been so long since we've had a deck that can play into your opponent's turn to the level that this does. So I think that that's really cool, and that we probably will see this deck for a really long time.
I think people are just happy that fusions are back, that they are the meta dominant threat right now. It's the original extra deck mechanic, and boom, it's back in full force and it's swinging.
You know, it's really cool too, because the fact that I love fusions in general. I mentioned this the other day to a couple of my friends, and we were talking about like, you know, what does fusion as a summoning mechanic really need? And this was like before Tier, and I was like, you know, like, they just need to be able to not use as many resources as poly plus 2 names. And the fact that now you can utilize just your graveyard and it's all just free real estate is kind of insane. It's one of those things that just is really nice because there's so many different fusion options out there. We're getting the Dark World cards in 15 days. Then we can use King of the Swamp again to go and summon the new one, which is crazy, like the new Dark World fusion. So there's definitely going to be a lot more potential in the deck as far as like what you can do. And like, even once we see some hits to names, I'm sure that we'll even see more and more innovation to the deck as far as different things that you can do, new fusions that will come out to mitigate a lot of the problems that the deck will end up facing with the ban list. So I'm definitely ready to see where the deck ends up going.
Oh yeah, I'm calling it right now that Dark World Tier is going to be an annoying deck in the coming months. Like, just I'm saying it right here.
So the thing about Dark World though was that it was always the loop with Grapha, and now that we have Orange Light Pitch Mudora, if you're able to shuffle back Grapha, I feel like it might be a lot more manageable than it was before. There's going to be a lot of different things that we see with the deck. So I haven't played against any of the new support yet, but I'm sure that once we see it, it's going to be crazy. More beginning of the ends in everyone's deck, so everyone can draw a million cards, and it's gonna be interesting because we have all of our dangers still. We are still limited on, I believe, Jackalope and Snake, but it's still like we still have 3 Nessie, and we still have the option to play like a ton of dangers. So we might see a danger FTK again. We'll see. But I'm definitely interested to see where that goes. But leaning more into power creep and talking about FTKs, when it comes to where the game is going, and again, we see cards like Triple Tactics being printed. We see even like where the game is going to be going. A lot of the old decks that a lot of people are already afraid of back then and seeing them come back now, like i.e. Dark World. Where do we think that power creep is going, and would we potentially even see like a set rotation out of Yu-Gi-Oh just to make sure that things like that don't reoccur?
I know that you want to talk about it later in the video, but I could see the new master rule that theoretically is going to be released within the coming months be a set rotation. Like, imagine how much that would change the game and shake the foundations of what Yu-Gi-Oh is.
Yeah, it would be definitely interesting to see a set rotation. I don't know if they'll ever actually do it, but I know that a lot of people have talked about it here and there because it's something in the back of everyone's mind constantly.
I think power creep is pretty healthy for the game. Like, decks can't stay powerful forever, right? Obviously, I don't see that happening anytime soon for Tearlaments, but yeah.
As far as that goes too, with like a lot of the new cards that are getting printed right now, like Triple Tactics, is that something that you think is also going to be healthy for the game, or do you think that it's just one of those things that come with the game when you play it in general? Like, there's always going to be like the next best deck.
I think that's pretty healthy, like I said, because I wanted more cards that more people could use in their decks so that we could have more variety in the format. So if they print cards like that, I think that would make the format more healthy.
Yeah, we've been seeing quite the time with like all these different quote unquote good stuff decks, right? We saw like the what was it? Brave, Prank, Souls, DPE, like all these different decks that were just like 4 or 5 engines in one deck as far as like generic cards that you could just like throw together and play. Do you think that having like the more pile decks versus decks with like their own identity is better as well, or do you think that you'd rather see like a fair mixture of both?
Honestly, I like seeing varieties, so like seeing people come up with like pile decks like these is pretty interesting, and yeah, the theory building behind it is interesting to see as well.
I was at the tournament that Cody first introduced the adventure pile deck. Because we had met at some previous tournaments beforehand, so we had kind of known each other, and he was like, "Yo, I created this stupid deck, and Sangan is the key piece."
Oh,
And I was
Manabe.
like, "Yeah, yeah." And I was like, "Okay, I guess. Do you think you're gonna do good?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna win this. Like, this deck is unbeatable." And I was like, "All right, you do you, my guy." And then he won the event, and that deck that he told me that he had come up with the idea while driving to the event. And the fact that that deck essentially evolved into becoming the main meta over the next few months, I thought was really cool. And it was almost like taking a step back to basically how GOAT format is. That entire deck was just good card dot deck. And like that was the whole purpose of it. Like, stick every single good engine in the game in that deck. And so I thought that was really cool. But I also really, really like it when there are archetypal decks that face each other. Just because I'm an archetype kind of guy. I really like the lore behind cards. And so I see the argument and I appreciate both sides of, pile versus archetype locked. And it's cool to just see the amount of thought that goes into both of them.
Yeah, I love the pile decks. I'm not gonna lie. My regional top was playing 60 card Striker. It was like Striker, DPE, Souls, Brave, And it's just one of those things where the more that you can fit together in a deck like that, I think it's so based. It's just like unironically based, you know, because that was like the archetype. All right, like not even like the archetype. It's just like the acronym for the deck that we were using. But like it was still like super cool, and being able to have the game seal in my side deck and have a lot of people asking me like, you know, why aren't you playing Godarla for the barrier statue? And I was like, listen, small world, hand trap, enchantress, game seal, and they're like, oh, like you know, so it was just really cool the different things you could get away with in deck building like that.
Right. And definitely throw your opponent off too, because like they won't know what the fuck you're trying to do.
Yeah, it was really interesting because that happened when I was playing on somebody who had Dragoon on board, and usually with Striker, that's like a death sentence because you're just like,
Yeah.
wow, like that sucks. And I was like, Small World, and they're like, that's fine. I was like, oh, Kaiju, and they're like, oh, like it was just so funny. I was like, yeah,
I miss the brief window of when every Facebook group and like Twitter and Discord server was basically everybody trying to figure out how best to use Small World in their deck. Like I miss that. I love Small World so much.
yeah, that card's really cool. It searches literally anything you want.
Exactly. It's oh my goodness, I love it.
I just remember like I read the card the first time, and then I went online and I was like, let's see what people were doing with this. And then people made apps to just like you type in like a card and it'll tell you all the different bridge possibilities, like all like 1,600 of them. And I was like, this is insane.
I still have Yishan's computer program code like downloaded onto my laptop to figure out all the Small World bridges.
Yeah, and then people were playing like Dinotherium and whatnot too. Like there's so many like cool cards that were just so random in decks because you're like, why are you playing that? It's like it's a bridge. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
cool. So just kind of leaning off that too and talking more so about the next master rule as well. I personally want to see Pendulum get the ability to special summon to any zone, but you know, who knows? I think that might be too broken. We'll see. Pendulum as a mechanic is definitely one of the craziest things we've ever seen. But like maybe it's time for Pendulum to have a shot. They don't have Electromite. If you need to put like another card in the list, so be it. But like let the decks try to be a deck. And if it's a problem, deal with it afterward. But I just want to see Pendulum get a shot again.
I'd like to see Pendulum. I'd support that. I'd be okay with Pendulum coming back into the limelight. I played during the Pendulum FTK. That was my second time coming back into the game. And it was like, yeah, the Pendulum FTK was annoying, but it was so cool to see like the innovation behind the deck and seeing how it all worked. And honestly, even though I knew I was being FTK'd, I liked watching it happen. Because I was like, this combo is so cool. And I'm with the Draco Slayer support. I like Pendulum. I think Pendulum is just cool. It's something so uniquely Yu-Gi-Oh! And I love it because it's just this wonky card. Like, oh, it's a monster. It's a spell. It can do, I don't know, whatever you want.
So I came into the game like way later after pendulums became irrelevant, I think. Like when they came out, were they broken?
So like the Pepe deck was the Perform Impel Perform Age deck, and it lasted a weekend, and it got emergency ban list.
Oh, damn.
It was like 30 out of 32 at the first YCS. It was all just Pepe, and it might have been 31. I think the other deck was Cosmo, and it was just like the most wild deck. And like the OCG had Shockmaster, we did not, but like just what the deck could put up was actually just absurd. And with that in general, we got the new master rule, and then when the new master rule came out, they're like, listen, like you can fusion, you can exceed, you can synchro wherever you want, but pendulum, they have to be to an extra monster zone or an arrow. And it just like was so crazy because at that point you're like, wow, like pendulums are super nerfed. But I think like if you were to let pendulum try again, there's two things that I keep in mind. One is that whenever you look at a format in general, you have to be able to balance it around a certain idea. So like right now in the OCG, they have max illegal, right? So you have to balance your format around Maxi. I think that if you wanted to give Pendulum a shot, you have to keep in mind that Pendulum, the issue with Pendulum in general, is that the deck is so inherently built to go first. The end boards going first are almost always unbreakable. And it's just like kind of crazy because of what the decks can set up. And usually they're scythe decks. I think going with like Valiant, even though that deck is pretty bad, it's just like where that was going. I thought that was really cool for Pendulum because it's not super oppressive, but still plays like your mid-range deck. I think that if you want to give Pendulum a chance again, there's probably a lot that you'd have to put on the ban list to make sure that it's not going to be as crazy as it was before. But if you release a lot of new cards for Pendulum, like do another set how they did for like PK, and then they like released Rusty, and they were trying to like bring back cards and like make them a little bit more fair. I think that you make some more fair Pendulum archetypes, because at that point, like having it behind a wall of saying like you have to summon 2 arrows is really unfortunate, because Pendulum has so much potential to be such a good couple decks, even because like a lot of what we see right now is that Pendulum doesn't really have like an identity. It's just, again, the good cards. You just play like some of the Magician cards. You play like now a lot of like the Draco Slayer cards. And then that's kind of like the deck, and it's all revolved around like Ignister. So I think that like now you have to basically like make Pendulum, but like remake Pendulum, and then it'll probably be fine to at least try again.
Yeah, I think as long as it keeps the Pendulum scales within the spell trap card zone, you're gonna be okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I can stand behind you guys on this one. My pendulum sounded broken when they came out.
So the thing about Pendulums is when they first came out, they weren't super broken. Like, Cleafort was the first major Pendulum deck, and yes, it was broken, but it got broken after its 3rd set upon release, and it didn't so much really use the actual Pendulum mechanic until that 3rd set. If you're watching like History of Yu-Gi-Oh with MBT and SEMO. But Pepe came out like a good almost 2 years after Cleafort had its time in the limelight, and that's what broke the mechanic that made people realize, oh crap, this was a mistake. Like, these cards are beyond busted. It's almost like how when Lynx first came out, we were like, oh, this is going to slow the game down, and then 2 years later, we're like, oh my gosh, Lynx have broken the game. Like, that sounds more like Yugi Doomer, Yugi Boomer, but it's like my goodness, like, the way that the game is played is so different now. And that's how it was with Pendulums. They first came out and people were like, this is going to be broken. Oh, it's not too bad. And then Pepe came out and people were like, oh yeah, okay, this is broken. Yeah, we were right.
Yeah, and it's basically like the delayed fuse, right? Because like when Code of the Duelist came out that introduced Link summoning, we did get Firewall Dragon. And like Firewall, we all kind of looked at it and we're like, oh, that's good, but we didn't know like how good it would be. And then all of a sudden people started doing like crazy U-Links and just like insane things with Firewall. And so it like took a while. And it's kind of the same thing with Pendulum. Like, we got the structure deck with like Time Gazer and Stargazer, and we're like, these are cool, like just kind of looking at like what they could do, and the ability to just summon 5 from your hand at one time, also pretty scary, because then we got like Magispector and we got Kieran, which Kieran can't be targeted by card effects. It's also just like a compulsory, and so that card was ridiculous. And so there's a lot of different things that kind of led up to Pepe being like so crazy. And it's always just going to take like one idea or like one deck that really does break the mechanic. So like, I feel like in the same way, you could say that like Pendulum was really broken because of things like Pepe, whereas like Lynx were also really broken because of cards like Summon Sork, Gumblar, Firewall, like all these cards. The mechanic itself, and this might be like a little not great of an analogy, but like the mechanic is only going to be as insane as you let it be, because like even right now, like with Link summoning, like we have a lot of good Links. Like, we have Underworld, we have Axis, we have Appaloosa, like, all these cards that are objectively very, very good cards. But, like, with Pendulum right now, we don't have anything that's, like, crazy. We have, like, Goliath and whatnot that are, like, really good. But, like, other than that, we still don't have cards like Kieran as well. So, I don't, this is where I'm saying, like, there is a potential to at least give the summoning mechanic another try.
I'd like to see what Pendulum could do if the shackles were released a little bit.
It's only a problem with Pendulum because if you give him an inch, they'll take it a mile.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I'm pro entropy. Let chaos reign. I want to see what it does.
I feel like that happens a lot with different decks though. Like we see a card come out the ban list like Snow and we're like, oh, okay. You know, like we'll see what that does and then immediately reband.
Yeah.
It's like when Snatch Steal came out the ban list and everyone's like, that's not okay. And then it got rebanned immediately and we're like, yeah, that's not okay.
I'm not going to say I told you so, but...
Thank you both for joining me today, just because, you know, these discussions are always a lot of fun to have, and it's one thing that I really like having on the channel is to be able to introduce everyone to new channels, and I know that neither of you have been on the channel before, so welcome here, and, you know, looking forward to more episodes of the podcast in the future, but thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. The conversations are always really fun, and it's always, like, you can go on, like, really ambiguous rants sometimes on, like, the different cards in the game and, like, all the different aspects of the game that no one really talks about, and I think that's always a really fun conversation to be had as well.
To everybody watching this or listening to this, the moment I hit 2,000 subscribers, I'm taking Ally of Justice to the next major tournament. So if you want to see that, there you go.
And one day I will win a tournament, like a YCS with Nitrios. Just you guys wait on it.
Okay, I'm calling it.
I'll also link both of your channels down in the description below if you want to see the journey of Notorious or the Ally of Justice YCS run. So I hope that everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.
Thank
See you around, guys.
Bye.